All right, this is another episode of Viva on the Street with Winston. He will pee outside. He will pee outside tonight. Another update. We are entering, I believe it is week 48 of Canada's 2-week lockdown to flatten the curve so as not to overwhelm our healthcare facilities. We are entering week 6 of Quebec's 4-week curfew. Some updates. I heard today from a personal friend of mine who was flying into Canada from the United States, followed all the protocol, Justin Trudeau's new rules about having to take a test, a PCR test, within 72 hours of departure, showing that as evidence before boarding the plane, when you land, showing the result, and apparently potentially taking another test once you land. Apparently this person was told that they were part of a new pilot project, which began today. They were pulled out of whatever line they were in and redirected to another lineup. From what I was told, no social distancing, international flights, a ton of people in a line where they were shoulder to shoulder, wearing face masks, apparently, but no social distancing for 2 to 3 hours before they were subjected to another PCR test at the airport. The person was apparently so livid that they were going to leave and sought advice as to whether or not to just get up and leave the airport. They did not seek that advice from me, and I might have given them the cowardly advice, which would be just to stay and wait. But they were livid. They were livid in that they were pressed shoulder to shoulder with, if it wasn't 100, it was at least dozens of international flights of Lord knows who. And as far as they were concerned, they were subjected to more risk in this new pilot project protocol, whatever it was that they were subjected to, than they would have otherwise been just allowed to leave and go into whatever quarantine facilities they were required to stay in. So I saw Justin Trudeau tweeted today, just timely and perfectly, right on cue, that as far as it goes for international flights, everyone's going to be subjected to the new rules, which we have discussed on these Viva on the Streets. You need to take a test. Upon arrival, you might need to take a new test. And if your test is negative, you still have to go home and quarantine. If your test is positive, you can be whisked off to a government-designated quarantine facility without being told where you're going and without being told your loved ones where you're going. Well, Justin Trudeau said, as of today, because this is how government is run, with one person just making up the rule on a day. As of today, upon arrival, you're going to have to be subjected to a new PCR test, notwithstanding the fact that you have taken one within 72 hours prior to boarding your plane. And if you test positive, you will be taken to a government-designated quarantine facility. If you test negative, you can go home to quarantine. This is coming from Justin Trudeau. So this would explain the new pilot project protocol that this individual who thought that they were following the rules was subjected to upon arrival. Which brings us to part 2. A lot of people have been tagging me on an Instagram video from one, his name is Real Chris Sky. Pretty sure that's his name. Don't know who this person is from a hole in the wall. I've watched a bunch of his videos on Instagram. All I know is that the dude is jacked in that he makes Conor McGregor look like me. He has tattoos that make Conor McGregor's tattoos look like Conor McGregor's tattoos. But he posted a video apparently upon arrival at the airport saying that he was not going to subject himself to this PCR test, that he was within his rights as a citizen to refuse, that the police could not do anything to arrest him, that they can give him a ticket, and that apparently however many thousands of tickets they have issued, nobody has paid these tickets, and that what they were demanding of arriving travelers was not allowed under the Quarantine Act, Section 14.1.
So, yeah. Hi.
Is there a reason you don't have your mask?
Yes, because I have a medical condition, so I don't need to wear one. And I'm also a Canadian citizen, and this is a violation of our Charter Right, Section 6, and a violation of the Emergency Act 14.1. So I'm going to be declining your test today. Okay. Thank you very much. But I just want you guys to acknowledge for 91,000 people watching that anybody can refuse the test.
Yeah, I'm just giving you identification.
Perfect. Thank you. Ooh, I'm getting a ticket. Oh, not another one of those tickets. You know, tell everybody how many people have been convicted of those tickets in Canada. Answer? 0. How many people have been charged? Thousands. How many people convicted? 0. Why? It's a violation of our charter rights.
In his video, he said that travelers were to be distinguished from Canadian citizens, which I'm not sure that he is right about. But one thing he seems to be relatively right about is that the forced PCR test does in fact violate Section 14.1 of the Quarantine Act, which says that you could be subject to some form of testing by designated agents, whatever, but not any testing that involves penetrating your body with an instrument or entering your body with an instrument, I believe is the terminology used in the Quarantine Act. The PCR testing, I had one done, goes way up your nose, up into the nether regions of your brain. And that would seem to violate the restrictions imposed by Section 14.1 of the Quarantine Act. I'll flash the screenshot of Section 14.1 so you can read it, which specifically says that the test shall not involve any instrument that enters the body. I'll also flash you a bit of the video of this individual so you can see what to do or what not to do upon arrival in Canada. And in his video, he says, Canadian citizens are not travelers. And when you return to your country, you're not a traveler, you're a Canadian citizen. I'm not certain about this distinction in the Quarantine Act. From what I can read in the Quarantine Act, a traveler is anybody, including a Canadian citizen, returning to Canada from travels. So whether or not one would take the advice of this individual and potentially get into the trouble that this individual may or may not have gotten into, or having gotten the ticket that this individual may or may not have gotten, and whether or not this individual is going to have to pay this infraction or not, seems to be on point with the PCR test potentially violating Section 14.1 of the Quarantine Act in that it enters the body. It is an instrument that enters the body, and there was a reason, presumably, why the law was drafted that way. Whether or not current leaders wish to respect the law, let alone the Constitution, is a separate matter. But that is it. I mean, that is where we have actually gone as a Canadian society now. The borders have been closed for a year. A year into this, 48 weeks into the 2 weeks to flatten the curve so as not to overwhelm the healthcare facilities, the borders are still closed. Lord knows what provincial and federal leaders have done to increase hospital capacity, because that was the reason for which the lockdown was put into effect in the first place, was not to overwhelm healthcare facilities. Well, if you have a year to prepare, you might want to think of building up the healthcare facilities and not just locking down people so as not to overwhelm whatever. And what else was there? Oh, setting aside the monumental failures one after another, Justin Trudeau in the early stages, for those of you who don't know, in February 2020, not 2021, Justin Trudeau was donating PPE that Canada had to China, notwithstanding knowing that the threat was coming and what was on the horizon was coming. It was known. Donating PPE to China. Then, months into it, instead of protecting the vulnerable, because they didn't have enough PPE in long-term healthcare facilities, what happened. We are now a year into this, and no end in sight. And not only no end in sight, but it just seems that the restrictions are getting more and more draconian, more and more unconstitutional, and quite literally more and more invasive. That is the update. Oh my gosh, this dog will pee. We will walk. We are going to walk until somebody pees somewhere else than in the house. What can you say? This is the world in which we're living. Real Chris Sky, I don't know who he is. I'm not sure I would do what he does. I'm certainly certain I wouldn't do what he did, and I wouldn't post it to social media, but the world is filled with different people who respond differently to what they perceive to be fundamental, unconstitutional injustices. And Real Chris Guy is responding in the way he's responding, and I've got now friends who are experiencing the brunt of these measures firsthand, and they're not appreciating it all that much. So with that said, we will have another Viva on the Street update sooner than later. That is the update as of today. I think it's February 22nd, the date upon which Justin Trudeau announced new measures as of today. When you land, a new PCR test, notwithstanding the one that you got within 72 hours. And why? Why can you not quarantine at your place even in the presence of a positive test? I mean, this is what truly frightens me, is if a positive test upon arrival can empower the authorities to whisk you off to a government-designated quarantine facility where you're not told where you're going and your loved ones are not told where you're going, we are one step away from a positive diagnosis within the country, empowering the authorities to do the same thing. And that, in as much as the first reality materializing is terrifying, the prospect of the second being one step closer is morbidly terrifying. So that is it. Dog's gonna pee. Take care of yourselves and catch you on the next one. Peace.
Peace.